Obviously, being a Year 6 teacher is a real roller coaster, especially when it comes to getting the kids ready for the SAT.
Welcome to Test Time Tips, with practical help for all those pressures of test time.
I think when I woke up in the morning, it was more just making sure I got into school on time.
You're rushing around to make sure you've got enough papers, pencils, everything's sharp.
There's things that you can't help. You can't help children being sick.
You may have that one child that doesn't show up.
We've got some time-saving tips from a group of experienced teachers, as well as some solid advice from expert George Turnbull.
It's like a windy day. It tends to get the students excited, and you don't want them too excited. You want them to be relaxed when they get into that testing room.
Everything you need to know to prepare yourself and your pupils before, during and after test time.
In the weeks before the test, you should be familiarising the students with what they've got to do on the day that they're tested. And so if they're used to working in groups, for example, and collaborating with one another, the testing situation is very much different from that. So you need to get them into the situations where they're working in isolation and not chatting to each other, not asking each other questions. They need to be able to look at a test paper. They need to be familiar with the language on the test paper and perhaps do past papers so that they'll be used to working to time and they will be used to seeing the sorts of questions that they're going to get and in the environment in which they're going to finally set that test.
I was able to come up with various strategies to relax the children. One of them was actually for the children to have an artistic representation of SATs. And the trend was that children would have this head, it would draw the head of a child, pulling his hair out, and inside the child's brain, letters and numbers and all sorts of things.
Don't sort of impose the stress of the school onto the youngster if it's possible to avoid that. Testing at the best of times can be nerve-wracking, but you want it to be as natural an occurrence as is possible. And so, of course, some preparation towards sitting tests is an important factor to involve. I've heard that some schools have yoga lessons and other schools do other means of relaxation, and that's part of the whole ethos of the school, and I think that's to be commended. In the days before the test, you should be getting the room ready, and part of that means that information which could be used during the test by the students should be removed or covered up.
Some schools I know take the displays down, but we prefer to cover them because after the test it's easier to take the covering off and to show the displays again.
It doesn't mean to say you make the place bare. If you can put something in its place which would help the environment, then that's fine, but there shouldn't be information on the walls that can be used in the test.
It's a different layout, but it is still their classroom.
I have heard about a case where the word that was to be spelt was extinguish, and of course at the fire extinguisher that information was there. And so just be careful, check around the room and cover that sort of information up. Keep the fire extinguisher there, of course, in case there is a fire and you need to put it out.
The Friday before, or whenever before, everything in your class needs to be prepared. You need to know where your pencils are, where your sharpeners are, because the last thing the children need to see you doing on the morning of a test is running around looking for things that should have been in place. Because remember, for them, you are the ultimate organiser. Exam morning itself, I'm sure, is more nerve-wracking for the teachers than it is for the students.
I do remember coming in at 7 o'clock in the morning and thinking, oh my goodness, this is the day. This is the day when children need to actually show what they can do, what I know that they can do.
You may have that one child that doesn't show up and you have to run down to the office, let them know that they're not there, what's going to happen.
It was only about 20 minutes into the test that we realised that one child was off sick, so communication is important.
The only phone that should be in the testing room is your own phone, and it should be turned off. The only reason you have it there is if you need to contact somebody because you need some help in the room.
We provide water in each room for children, and also we provide a piece of fruit as well for those children that haven't had breakfast in the morning.
You have to remember to have your own breakfast. You've advised the children to look after themselves, get enough sleep, Make sure they have a healthy breakfast. You need to do the same, because the worst thing is having your stomach growling in the middle of a silent exam.
In the testing room itself, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Do you need to open a window? What's the environment like? Is it as it should be and as it normally would be?
Tissue's another issue. They always want to blow their nose, so make sure you've got a nice big roll of tissue available.
The rules quite clearly state what should be available. In some cases, a calculator is allowed. In some cases, spell check is allowed. But if you look at the specific rules for each subject, it will tell you what's allowed and what's not allowed. And of course, have some spares, spare pencils, spare pens.
One thing they didn't tell me was that it actually feels like you're doing the test as well.
I think for the teachers, they get quite excited because every year the tests are different as well, so you're actually quite interested to find out what they're doing this year.
You're as much waiting to see, not if you can do the test, but have I taught them everything they need to know?
Just before the test is about to start, make sure that they're as relaxed. And you may have practice techniques, and you will have your own techniques, but just taking 6 deep breaths and relaxing and moving about just a little bit, and practice that before they get to the testing room so that they know what to do and know why they're doing it.
Obviously, for 2 weeks before, you've already said to them, you've given them the exam timetable, you've given the parents the timetable and told them to put it on the fridge.
The parents do see a lot in the media about SAT's pressure on children, and I think they see it as a pressure on themselves. So it's very important that we keep the parents calm, because if the parents calm and have a good relationship with the school and know what's going on, then the children are calm as well.
The parents should be mindful of the fact that the students need to be as unstressed as possible and, be a help in solving any problems rather than being the problem itself.
The class are very, very needy. They still come really needing you to be, that solid person for them that's going to take them through the test just like you've taken them through the whole year.
If you feel over-anxious, then do your best to contain that and not to pass it on. That's important.
Inside, your stomach's churning, you're anxious, but you have to put on that front and that persona that says, I am calm, we can do this.
Inside, freaking out like anything. But on the outside, I'm hoping I'm keeping that calm exterior.
The more organised you are, the calmer it is. And that's what we make sure. Nice and quiet, calm and very purposeful.
And smile all the time, all the way through, encourage them.
I think just outside the testing room, you've checked already, you've got what you require in terms of water or tissues. Make sure that the youngsters too are prepared, they've been to the toilet, in an informal way before they get into the formality of the test itself.
There was a time when the class teacher was distributing water to the class just before the test, and had said, be very, very careful with the water on the tables. We don't want it spilt on the SATs papers. And as she said that, she turned around and spilt some on a test paper, which then we had to quickly mop up.
There are test instructions that you have to give the children. And I find myself the night before sitting in bed with the test booklet, reading exactly what I have to say, practicing it out loud. My husband gets really annoyed sometimes, but that's okay. He could probably sit the test now, just to make sure I get them right.
There's things that you can't help. You can't help children being sick.
One of the children decided to freak out on this test, sat down, wrote their name, wrote the date, turned to the first page, screamed. Everybody just stopped and looked. And it was that kind of impulse moment. You go over, you check, still wasn't going to stop screaming. We take her out, making sure that we still got enough people inside the class. But she just didn't calm down at all, at all. And we had to arrange for her to sit it on a different day.
All sorts of things can happen in primary schools. It could be toilet, it could be just generally feeling upset, it could be a nosebleed, it could be many things, and I'm sure you're used to dealing with them. The only thing to remember that in the testing situation, you need to stop the clock, attend to what it is, and then start the clock again when that student is ready to continue.
If somebody throws up, it is disruptive for the test, it is disruptive for the whole situation, it's disruptive for the carpet.
One of the girls was violently sick. Whether it was to do with nerves or whether it was something she'd ate that morning for her breakfast, we don't know. But we had a bit of a job trying to keep the vomit away from us and the test papers and the other children, and then to clear up the mess as well before we could start.
You would need to have some means of contacting somebody outside of your room if you need to leave the room, and you may have to take a student out and to settle them down somewhere else, perhaps. And if that is the case, then they can get the full time for the test as before, and you just stop the clock when they feel unwell or whatever, and then start it again and carry on as before. If it's interrupted the other students, then perhaps you need to stop them as well.
As long as you're organised. But there are things that will always happen on the day, and you just go with it and just try and keep as calm as you can.
I think it's important to move around so that you can keep an eye on what the children are doing and try and pick up any feelings of whether they're feeling very nervous, but at the same time not to stand over their shoulders really peering at their work.
Just, you know, as you would normally walk around, make sure children are okay. You know, if anyone looks upset, go and reassure them. Don't just leave them to get on with it.
How you behave in the room, whether you march up and down or act in a way which is abnormal to your normal behaviour, these are important considerations. Your main task is to make sure that the test is conducted as it should be and the students aren't disrupted in any way. So anything that you might do to disrupt that situation, you should avoid. My advice would be just to act normally in the way that they would normally observe the class when they were supposed to be doing something in isolation from the other students.
One time we were halfway through a maths paper and this child threw up his hands in the air and he's like, "I know how to do this one!" And he was just so excited and beamed, and he just got straight on and did with it. Everybody else just kind of giggled and then kept going.
I have heard in some instances that teachers are giving the timing too often, and that could be disruptive in itself.
Obviously 45 minutes in the life of 11-year-olds is quite long.
I sat in on a group doing tests when I first came to this school, and they reminded the children at 5-minute countdowns. It was like the space shuttle launch, you know. So that was strange, and with about 15 minutes to go, some of them were already freaking out.
By way of advice, that may suggest that you perhaps tell them halfway through the test, that they're halfway through the test, and maybe 10 minutes before, just to let them know that there's 10 minutes left to complete what they have to do. Well, I think after the test, you forget about the test, let them go out and play. There's no point in going over it and saying what they should have done, and it's not going to do any good at that particular point. Let them relax.
One thing I always say to my classes is that your test papers are going to be marked by someone far away. So it's about saying, they don't know me, I want them to know the best of me.
They've got an audience that's captive, reading their work. They should get the chance to show them how great they are, and that's what we've been telling them all year.
Making them see it as a celebration of their own achievements, that they have worked all through school and people just want to find out what they can do.
Keeping them grounded in the fact that the test is the short-term thing, their attainment for life is the long-term goal.